60 seconds. That's all it took. 60 seconds between a waitress's desperate whisper and the moment her abuser realized he'd made a fatal mistake. Not fatal in the way you think, but fatal to the life he thought he controlled. She'd endured months of terror. He made sure of that. But when she approached the biker's table, her voice barely audible over the jukebox, and asked a question that would change everything, the temperature in that diner dropped 20 degrees. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a lesson in why you never, ever mistake silence for weakness. Before we continue, this is Biker's Code here. We tell amazing stories about good bikers. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell, and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription is a step closer to our 1,000 subscriber goal before month end. And finally, tell us where you are watching from. We did love to hear from you. Bonnie's Diner sat at the edge of a desert highway, the kind of place truckers called home for an hour and locals called familiar. It smelled of coffee, fried bacon, and old stories that never quite ended. The neon sign outside flickered between life and exhaustion, just like the woman behind the counter. Her name was Lena, 28 years old, with tired eyes that smiled better than her mouth could. Every morning, before the sun pushed over the red Arizona hills, she'd unlock the front door, tie her apron, and tell herself that today would be better. It rarely was. She moved through the diner like someone rehearsing a role, each motion practiced, each smile measured. Regulars greeted her with easy warmth, and she returned it with a voice so gentle it could calm a storm. But behind that calm, her wrists ached, her ribs still tender from arguments that never should have turned physical. In the staff bathroom, she'd stand under the dim light and blend foundation over a yellowing bruise, tracing the edges until it almost disappeared. Almost. She'd whisper to herself, "You're fine," and for a moment, believe it. Travis liked her looking perfect, said it made people respect him more. He'd sit in the corner booth near the window, where the light hit just right to cast his reflection across the glass. That was his spot, always booth 7. From there, he could see every customer, every glance, every smile Lena gave that wasn't meant for him. He liked control, not the kind that kept order, but the kind that suffocated it. At first, people thought they were sweet together. The charming mechanic and the small-town waitress. He'd pick her up after shifts, bring flowers, pay for her groceries. Then he started showing up during her shifts, sitting silently, watching. At first, she thought it was love, someone caring enough to keep her company. But love doesn't feel like walking on glass. Love doesn't make you count the seconds between sips of his coffee, wondering what small thing might set him off next. Travis had a way of making his voice sound calm when he was angry. That was the worst part, the quiet before the storm. Smile more. He'd whisper through clenched teeth. People are watching. And she would, because people were watching, and no one really saw. Every tip she earned went into a small envelope she kept under the floorboard in her apartment. $20 bills folded tight like secrets. Not enough to run, but enough to dream. Some nights, she'd lie awake, tracing the scar on her arm from a night he'd grabbed her too hard, and wonder how much longer she could keep pretending everything was normal. Out front, the jukebox always played the same old songs. Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, bits of heartbreak wrapped in rhythm. Lena learned to move with the music, to let the sound drown out the noise in her head. She'd refill coffee cups, laugh at bad jokes, and keep her sleeves long. Customers saw warmth. They didn't see survival, but there was something different about Tuesdays. Tuesday nights, around 9, the roar of engines would echo from the highway. Chrome and leather, headlights slicing through the dust. The first time they came, she tensed. Travis hated bikers, called them trouble, but they never caused any. They tipped well, spoke softly, and always left the place cleaner than they found it. They treated Bonnie, the diner's aging owner, like she was royalty. Lena watched them from the counter, studying their easy confidence, the way they laughed without fear. Among them was one man she noticed more than the rest. Broad shoulders, quiet eyes, a stillness that felt almost protective. His patch read, HAMC, respect few, fear none. When he looked at her, it wasn't the way Travis did. It wasn't ownership or demand. It was awareness, like he'd seen women like her before. That night, as she closed the register, Travis's voice sliced through the calm. "Don't talk to them," he muttered. "They're not your kind." She nodded, saying nothing. But the seed had already been planted. Each Tuesday, the bikers returned. Each Tuesday, Travis grew more restless. And each Tuesday, Lena found herself glancing at the door, counting the minutes until she heard the familiar rumble of their arrival. It wasn't attraction. It was safety. Something about them made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out she hadn't seen yet. 3 weeks passed, and her envelope under the floorboard grew heavier. Not just with money, but with resolve. She'd been planning, quietly, carefully. Timing mattered. Fear made her meticulous. She'd learned his habits, the time he left for work, the tone in his voice before it turned dangerous, the subtle twitch in his jaw that told her when to stay silent. Outwardly, nothing had changed. She still smiled, still served his coffee, still covered the bruises. But inside, something was shifting. The part of her that once whispered, "You're fine," now said something different. Not for long. Outside, the desert wind howled against the windows. Inside, Lena wiped down the counter, watching the reflection of Booth 7 in the chrome napkin holder. Travis sat there, as always, pretending to read, pretending not to watch. She breathed in deep, let her hand rest against the counter to steady herself. If you've ever felt powerless, you'll understand what comes next. Subscribe so you don't miss how this unfolds. Because the truth is, power doesn't always look like fists or threats. Sometimes it's a whisper waiting to be heard. And for Lena, that whisper was coming sooner than she could ever imagine. Travis had a system, and it was working until it wasn't. It hadn't started with bruises. It never does. It started with charm, the kind that makes you feel chosen. Travis could be disarmingly gentle when he wanted to be, holding doors, remembering details, looking at Lena like she was the only person in the world who mattered. That was how he built his foundation. Every controlling man does. He made her feel safe first, so she wouldn't notice when he started taking that safety away. The first thing he took was her time. He began showing up at the diner at the end of her shifts, at first just to walk her home, then earlier, then before her break. Soon, he was there before she even clocked in. He said it was to keep her company, but everyone in town knew better than to question him. The unspoken truth in small towns is this: when you see something wrong, you look away, especially if the man doing it looks like he could hurt you too. After that came her phone. He said it made him nervous, her talking to so many people. He convinced her to share her password, saying trust meant transparency. Then he changed her lock screen, removed half her contacts, blocked anyone he didn't like. "I'm just protecting you," he'd tell her, "from people who don't really care." He started showing up when she ran errands. At first, it was coincidence. Then it was routine. He'd park outside the grocery store, pretend to scroll on his phone while watching through the windshield. Every time she stepped out, she'd see his reflection in the glass, waiting, assessing, ensuring she didn't linger too long in conversation. The walls around her were invisible but firm, and by the time she noticed, they'd already closed in. Lena tried to reason with herself. She told herself he'd been hurt before, that maybe his jealousy was just insecurity. She believed she could calm it with love, soften it with patience. That was her mistake, because Travis didn't want love. He wanted control, and the more she gave, the more he took. He started monitoring her shifts, checking the diner's hours online, showing up earlier when she covered someone else's table. If she ran late, even by 5 minutes, he'd wait at the curb with that smile that never reached his eyes. The kind of smile that warned her before the words did. "You know I worry," he'd say, running his thumb along her cheek. "If you cared about me, you'd answer faster." Then came the comments. "You look tired. You've gained a little weight. You should wear something different. That dress gets too much attention." Each one chipped away at her without breaking her entirely. That's how he worked. Erosion, not explosion. Slowly, quietly, until the woman who used to laugh freely could barely meet her own reflection. But what made Travis truly dangerous wasn't just his control, it was his satisfaction. He enjoyed her fear. It energized him. He could read it in the tremor of her hand when she set his coffee down, or the quick glance she gave the door before walking to his booth. And he'd lean back, smiling, knowing exactly what he'd built. Fear was his craft, and Lena was his masterpiece. One night, after a shift, Lena made the mistake of saying she missed her father. Travis didn't like that. Her father had been a veteran, a quiet man who believed in discipline but practiced compassion. Before he passed, he used to tell her, "Real strength protects the weak." She'd grown up believing that. Travis twisted it. Real strength, he told her, is control. It's making sure no one can hurt you first. She remembered the way her father once carried an injured dog from the roadside, whispering, "Don't let pain make you cruel." She'd never forgotten that line. But living with Travis was teaching her how easy cruelty could be. Then came the silence. The long, dreadful quiet between his moods, when she never knew which version of him she'd face next. He'd alternate between guilt and menace, one moment apologizing with flowers, the next gripping her wrist just tight enough to remind her who held the power. And she let him, because by then, she didn't believe she had a choice. But the human spirit has a way of noticing cracks even in the thickest walls. For Lena, those cracks began on Tuesday nights. The nights the bikers rolled in. The first time she heard them, engines rumbling like thunder beyond the dunes, she flinched. Travis had told her they were dangerous men, criminals, the kind of people who'd use a woman like her without a second thought. But when she watched them through the diner window, she saw something Travis didn't. The way they laughed with Bonnie, helped her carry boxes to the back. The way they treated the waitstaff with respect, never demanding, never cruel. And every time Travis sneered at them, every time he muttered under his breath about those animals, Lena's eyes told a different story. She saw brotherhood, not chaos. She saw restraint where Travis showed dominance. She saw strength used to protect, not to control. Something deep inside her started to shift again. It wasn't rebellion yet, just awareness. A subtle awakening that maybe, somewhere beyond Travis's shadow, there were still men who lived by a code her father would have understood. She noticed something about the bikers, something Travis hadn't. And that realization, quiet as it was, marked the beginning of his unraveling. These weren't just any bikers, and Lena knew it. Every Tuesday evening, just before the sun bled out behind the rusted water tower, the same low rumble rolled through Main Street, a thunder of engines that made the diner windows tremble and the neon open sign buzz like it might give out. To most folks in town, that sound meant trouble. But to Lena, it was beginning to sound like something else entirely. Jake and his crew were regulars at Bonnie's diner. They came in leather and steel, patched jackets, heavy boots, and eyes that carried the weight of too many hard miles. But for all their roughness, they carried themselves with an odd kind of discipline. They never shouted, never disrespected the waitstaff, and they never left a mess behind. There was a quiet code among them, one that spoke louder than their bikes ever could. Their reputation had spread through town in whispers. They were a Hells Angels chapter, local to Arizona. People feared them, judged them, crossed the street when they saw them. But behind that fear was something nobody ever talked about. These men had saved lives. When a tornado tore through a nearby town last summer, Jake's crew had shown up before the National Guard. They cleared debris, brought food, and even built a ramp for an elderly woman who'd lost her home. They never asked for credit, never wanted cameras. They just rode in, did what needed doing, and left. That night, Lena found herself stealing glances at Jake more often than usual. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray beard that caught the diner's light in streaks. His hands, rough and scarred, looked like they'd seen both construction work and combat. There was something steady about him, something that made her heartbeat slow down, if only for a second. When he caught her looking, she panicked, turning away to refill a coffee cup. But Jake didn't smirk or stare. He just nodded once, like a man acknowledging someone else's quiet struggle. And that nod stayed with her longer than it should have. She'd overheard stories about Jake's code. Protect women, children, and those who can't protect themselves. It was said like a vow, something he lived by. She'd even seen herself once. 2 months ago, an older lady had dropped her groceries outside the diner. Before Lena could react, one of Jake's men was already helping her gather everything. They loaded her car, refused her money, and rode off like it was nothing. Even their tips told a story. They didn't just leave cash, they left kindness. Notes scribbled on napkins that said things like, "Keep your chin up," or "You're doing great." It was strange how the people everyone feared were the only ones who seemed to notice her pain. Still, Lena couldn't bring herself to trust them. Not fully. Trust was something Travis had poisoned in her. Every time she laughed with a customer, he'd appear in the doorway, arms folded, eyes cold, watching. Every time she stayed late, he'd accuse her of lying. He'd taken her phone months ago, saying he'd keep it safe. What he really meant was he'd keep her silent. But the bikers made her wonder. Could escape even be possible? Could people like Jake, with all their danger and power, be the key to freedom? One night, as she cleared their table, her eyes caught the back of Jake's vest. The patch read, HAMC, protect and respect. She froze there, staring at those words. Protect and respect. Simple, but powerful. Two things Travis had stripped from her life. And suddenly, she wasn't just curious about them. She was holding on to them like a lifeline. What she didn't know was that Jake had his own ghosts. His daughter had left an abusive marriage just a year ago. He'd watched her disappear into herself, losing that spark he'd once seen in her as a child. When she finally escaped, Jake promised himself something. That if he ever saw another woman in that same trap, he wouldn't stand by again. He'd intervene, no matter the cost. That's why he kept coming back every Tuesday. It wasn't just the diner's coffee or the quiet company. It was Lena. He'd noticed the hesitation in her smile, the way she flinched at certain sounds, the makeup she used to cover her neck. He'd seen it before. He knew exactly what it meant. And Travis was getting bolder. His control was slipping, and when that happens, men like him get dangerous. That night, as the diner buzzed with low conversation and laughter from the biker's corner booth, Travis showed up earlier than usual. He took his seat by the window, pretending to read a menu he'd memorized weeks ago. Lena approached his table with the same hollow smile, her heart pounding. She didn't see Jake's eyes following her from across the room. Then it happened. As she reached to take Travis's order, he grabbed her wrist, hard enough to make the plates on the counter rattle. The pain shot up her arm, but she didn't cry out. She'd learned not to. But Jake saw everything. He set down his coffee cup slowly, eyes narrowing. Around him, his crew went quiet, their laughter fading into a heavy silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Lena didn't know it yet, but the moment Travis touched her in front of Jake, the pattern was about to break. This was it. Now or never. The diner's hum had shifted. Something electric hung in the air, a quiet storm gathering between the smell of coffee and fried onions. Travis sat in his booth like a king on a crumbling throne, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Lena. She could feel him watching her every movement, measuring her every breath. "Come here," he said, low enough for only her to hear. The command landed like a chain being yanked. She turned, tray in hand, and forced her feet to move. Every step toward him felt heavier than the last. When she reached the booth, Travis leaned back, smirking. "You think those bikers are your friends now? You think they'd look twice if they knew what you really are?" His words were venom, coated in charm for the crowd, but meant to cut her clean. A few customers looked up, sensing tension but pretending not to. That's how it always went. People noticed, but no one ever interfered. Lena's hands trembled as she set down his coffee. The cup clinked against the saucer, too loud, too shaky. The tray slipped, a plate slid off, and the crash shattered through the room. Every head turned. Every sound stopped. Travis didn't flinch. He just looked at her with that cold, deliberate calm that frightened her more than shouting ever could. He leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to pierce through her composure. "You'll pay for that at home." The words froze her. For a second, all the noise in the world faded. The sizzling grill, the chatter, even the jukebox hum. Just silence. Then, slowly, something in her began to move. Not out of rebellion, not even courage. It was survival, raw and trembling. She turned away from Travis's booth and began walking, one step, then another, each one steadier than the last. The sound of her shoes on the linoleum floor became its own heartbeat. Jake watched her come closer, his hand still on his mug, his eyes tracking her like a man reading between the lines of a desperate confession. When she reached his table, she didn't ask what he wanted to eat. She didn't even pretend. Her voice came out small but certain, breaking just once. "Can you make him stop?" she whispered. "Please. I don't know what else to do." For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Jake's men shifted in their seats, glancing between him and Travis. The air thickened. Then Jake set his mug down, the sound of it soft but final. His jaw clenched, his gaze cutting past her toward Travis's booth. His voice was quiet, even like a man who'd made up his mind. "Go to the kitchen," he said. "Stay there." And with that, the storm began to break. What Jake did next, nobody expected, not even his crew. For a few seconds, the diner existed in a strange, fragile quiet. The hum of conversation had died. The clatter of dishes had gone still. Even the ceiling fan above seemed to slow, blades turning in long, deliberate sweeps. Everyone felt it, the shift in air, the tension gathering weight. Jake rose from his booth, slow and measured, his leather jacket creasing softly as he stood. His crew exchanged glances but didn't move. They'd seen that look before. When Jake stood like that, it wasn't anger, it was decision. He walked across the diner floor, each step sounding heavier than it should. Travis, oblivious at first, leaned back in his booth with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world revolved around him. But the second Jake's shadow fell across his table, that smirk flickered. Jake didn't ask for permission. He didn't posture or puff his chest. He simply slid into the booth across from Travis and folded his hands on the table. His presence alone filled the space like thunder before a storm. "Notice you've been here a while," Jake said quietly, eyes steady. Watching her, Travis's face twisted into that slick, practiced grin, the kind of grin that had fooled too many people before. "Yeah, well, she's my girlfriend. Don't see how that's any of your business." Jake didn't blink, didn't smile. "Made it my business," he said, "when you put your hands on her." Travis's grin faltered for just a breath, then came back sharper. He leaned in, voice dripping with mock amusement. "You got the wrong idea, old man. We're just having a lover's quarrel. You bikers always need to play hero, huh?" Jake's expression didn't change. His eyes were calm, but there was a gravity in them, a weight that made Travis glance away for the briefest moment. "I don't play hero," Jake said softly. "I bury regrets." The words hung there, cold and deliberate. Travis shifted, breaking eye contact, trying to recover his confidence. But the stillness around them made it impossible to hide the fact that everyone in the diner was watching. Jake leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Took me too long to see it back then. My daughter was with a man like you." His tone darkened, lower now, steady as gravel. "She'd cover her bruises. Tell me she fell. Swear she was fine. I believed her. Thought I was giving her space. Turns out, I was just giving him time." The room went dead silent. Even the coffee machine stopped percolating, as if the building itself was listening. Travis forced a laugh, too loud, too strained. "You trying to scare me with some sob story? You don't know anything about us." Jake's jaw tightened. "You're right. I don't need to. Men like you don't hide well. You think control looks like love. You think fear earns respect." He tilted his head slightly, voice lowering. "But fear fades. Respect doesn't." The faintest tremor ran through Travis's hand, barely noticeable, but Jake caught it. He didn't press yet. He just sat there, unshaken, eyes locked on the man across from him. Behind Jake, his crew was motionless, waiting. They'd seen bar fights, gang disputes, worse, but this was different. This was personal. Travis exhaled, trying to sound amused. "You think you scare me? You're just a washed-up biker playing therapist." Jake smiled faintly then, one of those rare, unsettling smiles that didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said. "I'm a father who learned too late what monsters look like in daylight." Travis rolled his eyes and reached for his coffee cup, desperate to appear unbothered. But his hand betrayed him. It shook slightly as he lifted it. Jake noticed. So did everyone else. That's when Travis made his second mistake. He laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but from arrogance. A hard, dry chuckle that cut through the tension like a knife. "You really think this is any of your business? You and your little gang want to save the waitress now." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "She's mine. You get that? Mean it." Jake's fingers drummed once on the table. One slow beat. Then he stopped. The look that followed could have frozen fire. He spoke evenly, almost quietly, but every word hit like steel. "I used to think that too. that love meant possession, that you could protect someone by controlling them. But I was wrong. You don't own her. You don't own anyone. Travis opened his mouth to respond, but Jake's gaze didn't waver. You know what my daughter told me after she finally got out? He asked. She said, Dad, the worst part wasn't the bruises. It was believing no one saw me. He paused, letting that sink in. Well, Jake said, leaning back, voice steady as stone, she's seen now. Travis shifted again, but the silence around him was suffocating. Jake wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His words were enough to peel away every layer of Travis's false confidence. In the corner, one of Jake's men set down his fork slowly, eyes fixed on the booth. The tension was growing thicker, and everyone knew the storm hadn't hit yet. But it would. And when it did, Travis would learn that some codes aren't written on paper. They're carved in bone. Turns out, Jake had done his homework. And what he found was darker than anyone in that diner could have imagined. For 2 weeks, not 3, as Lena believed, Jake's crew had been watching. Quietly, deliberately. Every Tuesday, they'd observe the same pattern. The same man sitting at the same booth, watching the same waitress like a hawk. They'd seen the way she flinched when he spoke. The way her eyes darted toward him every few minutes, like someone waiting for permission to breathe. They saw the makeup she wore a little thicker each week. And for men like them, men who'd seen violence up close, those were signs they couldn't ignore. One of Jake's crew, a broad-shouldered man named Reese, wasn't just a biker. He was a former cop, retired early, disillusioned by a system that protected the wrong people. When Jake asked him to look into Travis, Reese didn't hesitate. A few calls, a few favors, and the truth unfolded like a stain spreading through water. Travis had a record. 2 prior domestic violence charges. Both dropped. Both times, the victims refused to cooperate. Reese had seen that phrase too many times before. It never meant innocence. It meant fear. It meant someone had convinced those women that silence was safer than freedom. Now, that same silence hovered in the diner. Travis tried to hold his posture, to maintain control. But Jake leaned back in the booth, calm as ever, his voice cutting through the tension. You know, Jake said, almost conversational, I had a friend do a little digging. Travis's eyes flickered, the first sign of unease. What's that supposed to mean? Jake didn't answer right away. He let the question hang there, the weight of it pulling at everyone in the room. Then, slowly, he said, means you've got a patter, Travis. 2 women before her, both too scared to testify, both covering the same kind of bruises she tries to hide. The diner went silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the hum of the fridge in the corner seemed to hush. Jake leaned forward, his tone still calm, but the steel underneath, it was unmistakable. You got a pattern, Travis. 3 women now, all scared to speak up, all thinking maybe it's their fault. But it's not. It never was. Travis's mask cracked. The easy charm evaporated, replaced by something raw and ugly. His lips curled, his eyes narrowing. You think you can come in here and start talking like you know me? His voice rose, the pretense gone. You don't know a damn thing about me. Jake didn't move. He just studied Travis with that unflinching calm, the kind that comes from men who've seen too much to be rattled by shouting. I know enough, he said quietly. I know you hurt women who think they can't leave. I know you smile while you do it. And I know men like you only stop when someone makes you. Travis slammed his hand against the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Lena, hiding behind the counter, flinched at the noise. But Jake didn't react. He didn't blink. He just kept talking, voice steady. You know what's funny? Jake said, almost himself. Guys like you always look the same when the truth finally catches up. Like a wolf who just realized the sheep weren't alone. Travis stood abruptly, the legs of his chair screeching across the floor. His fists clenched at his sides, his breath heavy. His composure was gone now. The customers, sensing the shift, started backing away. That's when a voice cut through the tension, a voice that didn't belong to any biker. I've seen enough. It came from behind the counter. Bonnie, the diner's owner, stood there, apron dusted with flour, her old hands trembling just slightly. She'd run that diner for 40 years. She'd seen people come and go, laughter and heartbreak, marriages begin and end, but she'd never seen anything like this. She looked straight at Travis, her tone calm but fierce. "You're done here, Travis. I don't care who you think you are. You're banned. For life." Travis's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The humiliation hit him like a blow. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The eyes that once looked away from him were now watching, unafraid, judging. His face flushed red, veins tightening along his neck. The laughter was gone now, replaced with something dangerous. He looked around, desperate for power he no longer had, but every gaze that met his told him the same thing. Not this time. And that's what happened. Travis stood up fully, chest heaving, fists curling tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The mask was gone now. All that remained was fury, pure, cornered rage. And that's when things got interesting. 7 bikers stood in the dying light of dusk, their engines cooling, their shadows long across the cracked pavement. The air around them was thick, too quiet for comfort, too heavy to breathe. At the center of it all stood Travis. His smirk was still there, but his eyes, they flickered. He could feel it now, the shift. The power he once drew from fear was gone, drained from the air like oxygen from a sealed room. He tried to reclaim it. "You don't know who you're messing with," he spat, his voice catching halfway between anger and desperation. His boots crunched on gravel as he tried to stand taller, puffing his chest the way he always did when he needed to feel like the biggest man in the room. But no one moved. No one answered. Jake didn't even blink. His crew, men who'd seen more pain than Travis could imagine, stood like statues behind him. No fists raised, no words exchanged. Just 7 men, silent, calm, and utterly unafraid. And in that silence, Travis's voice began to sound small. He laughed once, forced, sharp, brittle. "You think this is some kind of joke? You think you can scare me with what? Matching jackets and old bikes?" His words fell flat. No echo, no reaction, just the hum of crickets in the nearby field and the distant groan of an engine cooling. The quiet was louder than shouting. That's what broke him first. He needed noise. He needed resistance. Instead, all he got was the stillness of men who didn't need to prove anything. The realization crept in slowly, visible in his shifting stance, the twitch of his jaw, the way his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting at his sides. Jake stepped forward just once, slow enough for Travis to hear every grind of his boot on the dirt. "Here's what happens," Jake said, his tone level. No rage, no threat, just finality. "You leave. Tonight. Forever. Lena packs her things while my crew watches your place. You don't call. You don't text. You disappear." Travis blinked, confusion and disbelief crashing together. "And if I don't?" Jake tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving his. "Then we have a different conversation," he said softly. "One I don't think you'll enjoy." No one had ever spoken to Travis like that. Not his boss, not the cops, not even the men he used to intimidate. There was no bark, no posturing, just certainty, a quiet kind of justice that didn't need to shout. Travis's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes darted from one biker to the next. Each stood still, unreadable. No hate in their faces. No footy. Just the unspoken understanding that some lines could never be crossed again. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to laugh, to hurl another insult, to regain footing, but the words stayed trapped in his mouth. Jake wasn't bluffing. He could see it. The kind of man who didn't make threats, only promises. A single drop of sweat rolled down Travis's temple. His eyes flicked toward the road, then back at Jake. There was no path out that didn't cost him something. And for the first time, the man who used fear as a weapon understood what it felt like to be on the other side of it. Jake didn't push. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, waiting, giving Travis space to decide what kind of man he wanted to be in this moment. Around them, the night deepened, and the last light faded from the horizon. Finally, Travis stepped back. Just one step, but it was enough. The decision was made long before he realized it himself. The world he'd built on intimidation and noise collapsed quietly, right there on that patch of gravel. No one cheered. No one spoke. Jake gave a slight nod to his crew, and that was that. 7 men turned back toward their bikes in unison, the metallic clink of keys breaking the silence like a benediction. Travis stayed frozen, watching as their taillights flickered red against the dark. His breathing came shallow and fast, as if he'd just survived something he couldn't name. And in a way, he had. Jake's voice lingered in the air like a warning and a mercy all at once. You leave. Tonight. Forever. He'd meant every word. As the sound of the engines faded into the distance, Travis stood alone under the dim street lamp, his reflection trembling faintly in the chrome of his own truck's mirror. His hands shook, not from cold, but from the weight of realizing that control, real control, wasn't about fear at all. For years, he thought he ruled through strength. But tonight, surrounded by silence and truth, he discovered something harder to swallow. Respect was never his to take. It was only ever his to lose. And though he didn't say it, Travis knew he'd just lost it for good. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because while the bikers rode off into the dark, something lingered behind. The faint, dangerous spark of pride that refused to die quietly. Travis made a choice. But it wasn't over yet. Travis left without another word. The roar of his truck engine faded into the night, but no one relaxed. Not Jake. Not his crew. Not Lena. Everyone knew how men like Travis worked. The silence after the storm was never peace, just a pause before they circled back. Jake stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the road where Travis had disappeared. His shoulders didn't drop until the dust settled, and even then, the tension lingered in his jaw. He'll be back, he said quietly. They always think they can come back. But Jake hadn't come here to scare Travis. He'd come here to end something, cleanly, safely, permanently. And what Lena didn't know yet was that the real plan hadn't even started. Within the hour, headlights returned to the diner's parking lot. But this time, it wasn't the men. It was 3 women on bikes, leather jackets gleaming, silver patches stitched with the words, Iron Roses. The female division of Jake's club. They didn't say much at first, just gave Lena a knowing smile as they walked into the diner, carrying boxes and duffel bags. Where's your room? One of them asked. Lena blinked, caught off guard. My room. Yeah, another answered softly. We're helping you pack. Jake's voice came from the doorway behind her. My wife runs a women's shelter 2 towns over, he said. They've got a space ready for you. No one knows the address. No one except us. Lena's hands trembled as she reached for a box. The motion felt surreal. Only an hour ago, she'd been frozen by fear, unable to imagine escape. Now, there were strangers, no, protectors, moving through her life like an army of quiet angels. They packed quickly, methodically. The women worked with calm precision, laughing softly between themselves, cracking jokes to keep Lena's mind from spiraling. One of them handed her a small black phone. Burner, she explained. Already has emergency contacts. Jake, the shelter, the local sheriff. You don't call anyone else on it. Ever. Lena turned the phone over in her hands like it was a lifeline, and it was. When the last box was sealed, one of the bikers, an older woman with streaks of gray in her braid, knelt beside Lena's suitcase. You've got people now, she said gently. Remember that. Jake stepped forward then, holding a folder. Inside were printed documents, already half-filled. This is David, he said, gesturing to a tall man with broad shoulders and glasses who'd just stepped out of a separate bike. He's a lawyer. One of ours. We're filing a restraining order tonight. He's already on it. Lena's lips parted. You're serious? Jake nodded once. Dead serious. It was strange, the way the night had flipped. Just hours before, she'd been surviving minute to minute. Now, there was a blueprint for her safety, a network of strangers acting with the kind of care she never thought the world would give her. By the time they loaded her boxes into the back of a van, the diner's owner, Mr. Rowe, appeared at the door. His face was worn, his eyes full of something that looked like guilt. Lena, he began, his voice cracking slightly, I owe you an apology for not noticing sooner. She tried to wave it off, but he shook his head. No, I mean it. I should have done better. He hesitated, then added, I talked to my brother. He runs the other location out near Ridgeland. 45 minutes from here. He's short-staffed and asked if I know anyone reliable. If you want, the assistant manager job is yours. Full-time. Pay bump included. Lena's breath hitched. You'd do that for me? Wouldn't be doing anything you haven't earned already, Mr. Rose said, managing a small smile. Lena looked from him to Jake, then to the women standing quietly by the van. Her throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you all doing this for me?" Jake's eyes softened, and for a moment his voice dropped lower. "Because someone should have done it for my daughter sooner," he said. "And because real strength, it protects those who need it." The words hit her harder than she expected. She turned away for a moment, blinking back tears that wouldn't stop coming. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly over the hills, a quiet reminder that storms could pass, even if they left scars behind. As she sat in the van, she pulled one final item from her bag, a worn photograph of her father in uniform, smiling at a younger version of her, both of them holding a small wooden flag he'd carved by hand. She heard his voice in her head again, steady and proud. "When you can't fight for yourself, find someone who will stand beside you. That's what family means." The tears came freely now, but they weren't just from pain, they were from release. For the first time in years, she wasn't trapped. She wasn't alone. The convoy of bikes started their engines, the low rumble cutting through the night air like a promise. The road ahead wasn't simple, but it was hers. Every mile between her and Travis was a mile toward freedom. But as she looked out the window one last time, a strange unease tugged at her chest. Because 3 weeks later, everything changed again. But this time, Travis wasn't the problem. Lena thought this was the end of her story. But healing, as she soon learned, doesn't follow a straight line. It curves, doubles back, and surprises you in the quietest moments. Her new apartment was small but warm, tucked above a bookstore on a sleepy street where the mornings smelled of coffee and rain. She furnished it slowly, piece by piece, second-hand table, mismatched dishes, a thrifted lamp that flickered but refused to die. Each object, no matter how ordinary, carried the weight of freedom. She no longer looked over her shoulder when she walked home. She no longer waited for footsteps behind her door. Every Thursday, she met with her therapist at the shelter Jake's wife ran. The first few sessions were hard, words caught in her throat, memories fighting their way to the surface. But over time, something shifted. She began speaking without trembling. She started remembering who she'd been before Travis taught her to be afraid. It wasn't perfect. Some nights, she woke up shaking, heart pounding from dreams that felt too real. On those nights, she'd make tea and sit by the window, watching the streetlights hum. The world outside was still there, indifferent, alive, wide open. That thought kept her grounded. And Travis? He hadn't disappeared as easily as everyone hoped. 3 weeks after she'd moved, he violated the restraining order. He followed her halfway across town, parked outside the shelter one afternoon. But before he could step out of his truck, a convoy of bikes appeared at the end of the block. Jake's crew. They didn't touch him, didn't threaten him. They simply surrounded the truck, engines idling, eyes locked. One of them, David, the lawyer, handed Travis a folder through the window. "Police are waiting for you downtown," he said calmly. "You can either drive there yourself, or we'll call them to come get you. Your choice." Travis drove, straight to the station. Within the week, he was arrested for violating the restraining order. And when the system dug deeper, it found things he'd hoped were buried forever. Old warrants, unpaid fines, and a pattern of abuse that finally caught up with him. The court sentenced him to 6 months in county jail, with mandatory anger management and probation to follow. Jake didn't celebrate. Neither did Lena. But there was peace in knowing that, for once, accountability had found him. In the months that followed, Lena began rebuilding piece by piece. She learned to manage her own finances. She bought her first car, a faded red hatchback that coughed smoke every time it started, but carried her wherever she needed to go. The job at the new diner location suited her. Steady hours, decent pay, coworkers who smiled without looking for control in return. One evening, after a late shift, she caught her reflection in the diner's glass door before locking up. Her hair had grown longer. Her eyes didn't dart around the way they used to. There was still pain there, yes, but behind it, something stronger. Resolve. She'd gone from victim to survivor. And now, she was starting to live. Then came the day that shifted everything again. It began simply with a visit to the shelter. She'd stopped by to drop off a donation box. Extra supplies the diner didn't need. Jake's wife, Linda, greeted her at the door. "You ever think about volunteering here?" she asked with a smile. Lena hesitated. I wouldn't even know where to start. Linda laughed softly. That's the thing. You already have. You're here. That's enough. That night, Lena stayed longer than planned. She folded clothes, restocked shelves, helped another woman fill out paperwork for a new apartment. For the first time, she wasn't the one being rescued. She was the one helping someone else climb out. By the end of the month, she was part of the shelter's volunteer roster. Her shifts were quiet but meaningful, sorting donations, listening when others needed to talk. It became her sanctuary, her way of rewriting the story she'd once thought would define her forever. One afternoon, she heard laughter from the shelter's common room, a familiar voice. When she turned the corner, she froze. Jake was there, helping carry in boxes of supplies. Beside him stood a woman in her early 30s, confident, bright-eyed, with the same steely calm as her father. Lena, Jake said, grinning, meet my daughter, Emily. Emily extended a hand. I've heard a lot about you, she said warmly. Lena blinked, smiling shyly. All good, I hope? Emily laughed. Mostly. That moment sparked something new, a friendship that grew from shared understanding. Emily had her own story, her own scars. But unlike Lena, she'd been lucky. She'd had a father who stepped in before things went too far. Together, the two women began hosting small workshops at the shelter, courage circles, they called them. Spaces where survivors could talk, cry, and plan their next steps without fear. For the first time, Lena felt like she wasn't just healing. She was part of something bigger. A ripple effect. Jake's promise to protect those who needed it had become a living mission, passed on through the people he'd once helped. Every Sunday, she'd ride with the iron roses, helmet gleaming, wind cutting through her hair. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about reclaiming her power, feeling the freedom she'd once thought she'd never know again. But just when life began to feel whole again, her phone rang one evening while she was closing up the diner. The number wasn't one she recognized. She almost didn't answer. But when she did, a voice she hadn't heard in months came through the line, shaky, frightened, and desperate. And in that moment, everything she'd built, everything she'd learned was about to be tested all over again. Because the call that came next brought everything full circle. If this story matters to you, share it. Someone in your life might need to see this. Hit that share button. It could save someone. 1 year later, another waitress. Another diner. Another whisper. By then, Lena had changed in ways even she struggled to recognize. Gone was the timid woman who used to flinch at the sound of footsteps behind her. In her place stood someone grounded, calm, and quietly strong. The scars hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined her. They'd become part of the map that guided her forward. Bonnie's Diner, the original one, had long since been sold, renovated, and reopened under new management. But Lena had moved on to a sister branch across the county line, the one the owner had offered her that night of her escape. What began as a lifeline had become her career. She was now assistant manager, trusted and respected, her soft voice carrying weight with both customers and staff. She arrived early each morning before sunrise, the air still crisp, the world hushed. She'd unlock the doors, start the coffee, and set out the morning pastries, humming quietly to herself. For the first time in her adult life, silence didn't mean danger, it meant peace. The regulars adored her. The owner relied on her, and the crew looked up to her like a big sister. She had become what she never had before, a steady presence. But the true test of who she'd become came on a Wednesday afternoon, between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd. Lena was in the break room, sorting receipts, when she heard a knock on the half-open door. A young woman stood there, apron still on, eyes red from crying. Her name was Lisa, new hire, barely 22, polite but quiet, always keeping her sleeves rolled down even on the hottest days. Lena glanced up gently. Hey, Lisa, everything okay? The younger woman hesitated, biting her lip. Can I ask you something? Lena nodded. Lisa's voice cracked. How did you get away from him? The room fell silent. Lena's breath caught, but only for a moment. She recognized the fear in Lisa's eyes. It was the same hollow panic she'd once seen in her own reflection. That tremor in the hands, the darting glances, the forced smile. She knew it all too well. And suddenly, the world made sense again. Lena set down the papers, crossed the room, and sat beside her. "Lisa," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." The younger woman broke down. Words spilled out between sobs. Stories of control, of isolation, of a man who tracked her phone and checked her every message. It was a mirror of Lena's own past. Only now she was on the other side of it. Lena listened, patient and steady. And when Lisa finally ran out of words, Lena took her hand and said, "There's a way out. I promise you. I've been there, and I know what to do." That evening, after closing, Lena stepped outside under the dim glow of the parking lot light and made a call she hadn't had to make in nearly a year. "Jake," she said when he picked up. A familiar voice answered, warm and steady. "Been a while, Lena." "There's someone here," she said. "She needs help, like I did." Jake didn't hesitate. "Say no more. We'll handle it." Within the hour, plans were set in motion. The same network that had once saved her was now reaching for another soul in need. Jake's wife contacted the shelter. Emily coordinated transportation. The female riders, the Iron Roses, volunteered to escort Lisa safely out of town once everything was ready. Lena handled the rest with quiet precision. She arranged Lisa's final paycheck, secured her schedule to avoid suspicion, and packed her belongings under the guise of a staff cleanup. Every detail mirrored what had once been done for her. But this time, Lena was the architect, not the rescued. When Lisa asked, "Why are you helping me?" Lena smiled, the same way Jake once had. "Because someone helped me when I didn't think I was worth saving," she said. "And because real strength," she paused, her father's voice echoing through her memory, "real strength protects the weak." That line had carried her through nights of fear and days of rebuilding. It had come from her father, a veteran who'd known what it meant to stand between danger and the defenseless. And now, it was her mantra, passed down like a torch, burning bright against the darkness of the world. When Lisa finally left that night, she wasn't alone. The rumble of motorcycles escorted her down the empty road, headlights slicing through the desert air. Lena watched from the diner window, arms folded, tears glistening, not of sadness but pride. Before she locked up, she reached in her pocket and touched the small pin on her apron. Silver wings wrapped around a crimson heart, engraved with 3 letters, HAMC. It wasn't just a symbol. It was family. Jake had given it to her 6 months earlier, quietly, after a fundraiser ride for the shelter. "You earned it," he'd said. "Not everyone wears one of these, Lena. You stood up. You fought back. You're one of us now." Now, under the hum of neon and the echo of engines fading into the distance, Lena finally understood what he meant. It wasn't about leather jackets or loud bikes. It was about a code. A promise that when someone was in trouble, when darkness crept in, there would always be someone ready to ride through it. She walked back into the diner, lights dimming, the smell of coffee lingering. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was looking back on her life. She was standing at the center of it. And as she wiped the counter clean, she whispered quietly to herself, almost like a prayer, "No one gets left behind. Not on my watch." Outside, a single motorcycle lingered by the curb. Jake, waiting to make sure Lisa's convoy cleared the road safely. He lifted a hand. She nodded in return. No words needed. The code had activated again. And this time, Lena was part of it. The world had begun to whisper her story. It wasn't the tale of a victim, but of a survivor who'd quietly rewritten what courage looked like. The diner, once just a small town stopover, now carried an energy you could feel the moment you stepped in, a quiet strength that lived in every corner, every face, every choice. Lena had never asked to become a symbol. But when word spread about what happened that night, about the woman who stood her ground, about the biker chapter that refused to look away, something remarkable began to unfold. Women started showing up, not all at once, but one by one. A bruised lip here, a shaky voice there, each with a story too heavy to carry alone. Jake's chapter didn't just offer protection anymore. They built a bridge. They called it the Ride Home, a code name for the network they created to help women escape violence quietly, safely, and without shame. In just 18 months, 23 women had found their way out. New lives, new towns, new beginnings. It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about redemption. And Lena? She had found her own way to give back. Every Friday afternoon, In the quiet room behind the diner's pantry, she gathered women from the shelter, not to talk about pain, but about rebuilding. Some painted. Some wrote letters they'd never sent. Some just sat in silence, holding hands until the silence didn't hurt anymore. The shelter's director called it a support group. Lena called it Saturdays. Travis, meanwhile, had tried to reach her once, twice, too many times. His calls from prison violated his restrictions, and when the authorities found out, his sentence stretched another 3 years. Lena didn't celebrate it. She just exhaled. For the first time, peace didn't feel temporary. It felt deserved. Inside the diner, there were subtle changes, quiet measures only those who needed them would notice. Under the cash register sat a simple laminated card, marked with symbols and colors, a silent signal system for anyone in danger. It was Lena's idea. She said if fear had a language, safety should too. One morning, long before the breakfast rush, Lena stood before a gravestone worn by time. Her father's name still read clear, a small flag planted neatly beside it. She brushed the leaves from his name, her fingers trembling but sure. "I get it now," she whispered. "Strength isn't about not breaking. It's about rebuilding after you do." Her voice didn't shake this time. Later that day, back at the diner, she caught her reflection in the mirror near the counter. No makeup, no bruises to hide, no shadow behind her smile. Just herself, unfiltered and whole. Outside, the distant hum of motorcycles passed by. Jake and his men, moving like a promise in motion. She didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. She knew. At the far end of the counter, a new waitress pinned on her apron. The glint of a small purple ribbon, a domestic violence awareness pin, caught the morning light. She smiled shyly, adjusting it before stepping into her first shift. Lena noticed, nodded once, and poured her a cup of coffee. Because this wasn't just about one woman. It was about all of them. If you believe in this kind of justice, subscribe to Biker's Code. Every subscription is a step closer to our 1,000 subscriber goal before month end, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and comment, "The code protects." Because one act of courage can echo far beyond the moment it began. Thank you for watching.